Hello and welcome to the Ori Spotlight Podcast. This is your host, Jason Foster. Today we are joined by Arsalan Arif, the founder of Endpoints News. Arsalan, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here, Jason. Thanks for having me.
And so I'm happy to be able to turn the tables on you after our discussion at JP Morgan when you interviewed me on stage. You're the expert in the hot seat today, and it's an exciting time to be talking to you as well as an industry observer for the last, I don't know, you'll tell me how long, decade at least, and seeing what's happening in pharma and biotech over the last few weeks has been particularly interesting. So I can't wait to get to that very shortly. But if you don't mind, I'd love to start with your kind of founder story. You have your founder story of Endpoints and kind of the opportunity you saw, your background, and how you got to where the business is today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that question. I got into biotech, and in this line of work in a very different sort of way. I've always been a serial entrepreneur. I've always wanted to work for myself, but I've always been a news media nerd. I've always been a news junkie since I was a little kid, reading the Wall Street Journal and whatnot. Growing up in Kansas, and so I've been following the industry. I've been in this industry or in the media industry for almost 20 years now. Back in 2006, I was running one of my various little serial entrepreneur sort of gigs. Very different than biotech. I was running an amateur basketball league in Washington
Wow,
D.C.
cool.
Um, it was great fun and made a lot of friends. And some of the people that I met running that league in the DC area was working at a company called Fierce Markets, the publisher of Fierce
Hmm.
Biotech. And it was a very, very small company that was just getting started right around then. And I was recruited by some of the folks that worked over there to work in ad sales. Kind of needed a real job after the serial entrepreneurship was just barely profitable, not like obscenely profitable or anything.
Right.
And so I took that, and I actually that's where I never thought I'd be doing ad sales, but it was a online company that was looking to disrupt trade publishing. That was all just by sending stuff in the mail and monthlies and weeklies for trade publications, and this company was looking to do all of that online, and this was in the mid aughts. So I joined that company, and then when I joined that company, it was one of the early employees, and that's where I met my co-founder at Endpoints, John Carroll, our editor in chief. He was a freelancer there, and we worked together at Fierce and kind of built up Fierce Biotech and launched Fierce Pharma and built up all of those Fierce publications together and grew that. Really, we weren't the founders of it, but we pretty much grew those titles, and then after some time, we decided that it was time to leave and start our own thing. And so that's kind of the high level founder story, Jason.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned John. He's been just it wasn't in our discussion list, but how's he doing? I know he's been very public about his own health challenges that he's been facing.
Yeah, he's been very public about it. You guys, if you follow him on Twitter, you see that he's hanging in there. He's doing fine,
Good.
and that's no short part of the industry that we're in. Frankly, that
Exactly.
he's when we first got his cancer diagnosis, I could only really speak for myself, and it was very frightening because the
Mm,
way that he had come across it and discovered it and found it, and the medical system that he was in down there in South Texas wasn't so great, and really wasn't giving him the best medical advice, and it really was pretty dicey until he got himself to MD Anderson and got on some immunotherapies, and he's been hanging in there, and it's been a blessing, frankly.
yeah. No, great. Hopefully, case study for our industry that keeps going well. So it's great,
That's
great
right.
to hear. And for those, I mean, I'm sure you'd have to be living under a rock to not know what Endpoints does, but it'd be great to certainly in our industry. But tell us a bit about the business, kind of the focus areas, and kind of the. I think you have led the business through a business transition, joining the FT, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Endpoints News. Our slogan is the biopharma world is here, and our mission is to cover all the most consequential news in our industry in an independent way, and to do that in a daily fashion for people who are quite busy and who need a trustworthy source to know what's going on in the industry. It's very purposely the company of the name was called Endpoints News, and the news being a very important part of it. News, I like to tell people news is the definition of the word news is nothing but the plural of new. And so news is new things and that
Mm,
you uncover, and news stories that you discover new information, you report it out and tell true stories. And not that there are not other very capable folks and companies out there doing that, but the sort of opportunity that John and I had found is that what we discovered is in the news business, trust is everything. Trust is absolutely everything. And once you start in business, once you start getting enough layers in business, and the investors or generally the people who are running the business are far enough removed away from the consumers of the business, which are news consumers, essentially, media can be an intoxicating business for some because I mean, you're in CGT and you have these enormous sort of costs, and that come around with us. Our number one cost is always people. It's never going to be any kind of component cost to anything that we do, and our cost of goods is, I don't know, nothing generally. Servers and whatnot. And what we made the bet on was that it's really the people behind the company that you just kind of say, hey, do you trust my voice? Do you trust the veracity of the information that I put out? And the things that not only that we decide to cover, but the things that we don't cover as well. And that's what we had made a bet on, that if we were to closely control that and to put out our frankly our version of it, and people were to trust that behind the Endpoints News banner, that we would find ourselves having a very sustainable business that would have a good brand name for the long run. um, and that was the bet we made, and it's so far so good. It's been fantastic. It's been a wild journey, and you alluded to, yeah, we've have gone through a business change. John and I, we're very fortunate in the sense that when we had started it up, I'd mentioned about the costs. We very purposely didn't go out and raise any money at all. We It was something that we put it out there on our own from our own name, and put it out very put a website out there, an email newsletter, and worked every single day, and didn't spend any money on fancy graphics or a staff or anything like that. And we just started it with ourselves and built it out. And then, yeah, in 2023, we sold a stake of our business to the Financial Times. And it, I mean, it's been amazing. I mean, frankly, working at the Financial Times, and now I'm still I'm still leading Endpoints, but I do work for the Financial Times now, and it's obviously a internationally known, world recognized blue chip journalism brand.
mhm,
So the initial thing that we had sort of identified of trust being the most important thing in our business. When did have offers out there and whatnot, we were going out there and thought, how are we going to take our business to the next level? We were only going to be able to do it with a company or a partner that was quite literally in the same line of work that we do, with the same philosophy on how they run their business, with a very, very long term outlook on things. Um, and as you may know, the Financial Times is owned by Nikkei, the Japanese media company. And not only does the Financial Times already historically have a very long-term view of business and a long-term view of things, but certainly the Japanese do, and certainly Nikkei does. And it's been
mm.
absolutely amazing working under them.
Great. No, fantastic. Your own entrepreneurial journey, and you didn't use this word, but bootstrapping, as many startups do, and getting to a business combination. Fantastic. And you yourself have reminded me that you're not a cell and gene therapy expert in this subsegment of the market, but broader in biopharma. And so I know our listeners will be excited to hear about your perspectives, particularly as it relates to the, should we call it, tumultuous times that we're in as an industry, particularly in 2025, the first 3 months of the year, but even going back, the last 2022, 23, and 24 have been difficult for the industry. So, what are you seeing out there as a very interested and expert industry observer? What's happening in the biopharma industry more broadly?
Well, it's a very broad question. I mean, I to answer it in the most broadest sense is I'm very bullish on the industry. It's an amazing industry. It's so dynamic. It People in AI and technology will say, no, this is not right. But the industry that we cover, the industry that we're in, the industry that you're in, I firmly believe it's the most important industry in the world. Um, because here we are we're extending human life, making lives better. And the amount of dynamism and the amount of work that goes into it is it, it's always an inspiration when I go out there. So when you're right, even before the most recent Trump stuff, there was significant headwinds, and there has been really since post the, I guess, in 21 you would kind of consider it the high
Hmm.
right now for the industry, because you had all the sort of post-COVID highs coming off of it, the mRNA, high here. Everyone in the industry was very proudly walking around being like, here, even if you weren't personally working at the mRNA companies, here you are part of this industry that did save the world and did save millions of lives, no question. Um, and so you had that, and you had all the funding, you had all that, and even prior to that, cancer was always been sort of, I guess, the number one thing to be funded out there. And then you had all the other fundings, and then it just kind of came crashing down right after that, because um, you could say it was for a number of reasons. Certainly, markets do get sort of frothy. You have all the generalist investors coming in and just saying, "Wow, Moderna is now one of the biggest pharma companies in the entire world by market cap. How did that happen? Biotech companies are not supposed to go out there and commercialize their own thing, and here's this company that kind of proves the exception." And people wanting to rush in after that, and so you have I think at the time, even in 21, I was thinking, a lot of folks were thinking, well, wow, as you do in a mania, how is this possibly sustainable? But maybe it is sustainable, because this, look, we have these amazing vaccine that we just came up with just like that. And what else can mRNA do? What else? Now let's look at cell and gene therapy. What are all these other? How can we take it to the next level
Hmm.
and do all the other stuff out there? And obviously in this industry, you know much better than I do, but you need the right people in this industry. There's a limited amount of these experts that are out there. I mean, particularly in these really niche, like what the type of work that you're doing, they don't grow on trees, right? They just don't get multiplied out of universities and just ready to work at
Yeah.
Ori right out the back, with the kind of seasoning and industry knowledge and going through cycles and having all of that knowledge that makes a veteran sort of person, kind of multiplies a company. And so you had all of these massive rounds of funding out there and ridiculous compensation offers from companies that don't, that just have blue chip investors behind them, but not necessarily like a lot of validated science behind it. So that could be a lot of I felt like that could be a lot of wasted opportunity, with people just sort of chasing the highest sort of re- returns and highest sort of compensation. And then, okay, 18 months later, that's not validated, not working out, $200 million of investor capital, just poof. But a lot of people not seeming to be quite phased by that either, and just kind of moving on. Now, when I look at it, you see the type of stuff that I look at, when I think, well, what can I, what are my realistic growth expectations for Endpoints News, and how do I see the growth of my own company? Because it kind of mirrors the boom and bust of this industry. When times are really booming in this industry, our business is doing way better than I expect. Way I can't put I'll put projections out there and we just beat them and it seems like we're geniuses.
Right.
And then when the industry is down, we'll put projections out there and we will struggle to make them or we won't quite make them. And it'll be tough. And but it I do see it as a there's these times in this I guess famine and feast where I see right now, frankly, you see like the new company starts. I saw some stats yesterday that were right around, I think, 2015 or 2016 levels in terms of new companies being, new biotech companies being started and like initial funding rounds.
Hmm.
And it's way down, right, from the last thing. So that I tend to think that maybe this is the right even though sentiment is way off. It's very hard to get a new company funded that, unless you really know the right people or you've had the right track record or you've returned X amount of you've returned 10x gains to five different investors and they're just going to trust whatever you put out there. It the if unless you're one of those folks, it's going to get hard to get funded now. But I mean, I said this to you on stage too, where I'm not, I don't, I'm a cheerleader for this entire industry, not necessarily individual companies, but when I see companies like yours going out there, very, very specific technology, trying to solve a very meaningful problem in a very different sort of way that people hadn't thought about before. People thought it might be way too expensive or just absolutely crazy to
Mm.
do it that way. I tend to think that's you're probably I would say for folks like you definitely hang in there because this is probably exactly the right moment to be able to come up with a validated technology that kind of proves everyone sort of wrong and sets off a new trend or sets off a new bout of lemmings wanting to fall off another cliff that's coming. But it's best to be first at these things.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's a bit crappy right now in the industry, but for the folks that are doing their real work, this is where you make it or break it.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. I mean, I think I look back. I've been an operator in the 2000 .com bubble, which dates me obviously. And when that burst, no one thought anyone would ever invest in a online website company again, or what the heck is Amazon? It must be it was an idea ahead of its time. And then in 2008, no one was ever going to get a home mortgage again because of the whole kind of financial crisis. And it feels to me, and I was saying this to an investor earlier today, it feels to me we're at like peak pessimism right now. Like actually this week, last week the XBI was down 19%. It was a bad week. We all get that. There's been lots of noise on NIH and FDA, but this industry has been around for decades. Curing disease and helping people live healthier lives, and it will continue. And we need to maybe we need to be a little more turtle than hare here and kind of pull our head in and try and go a little bit slower. But this is the time that I've had several investors say to me, contrarian investors now are going to make a lot of money. Those that when everyone else is scared, it's the kind of old Warren Buffett analogy of being greedy when others are fearful. Now this is the embodiment of that. From what I can tell, is people are just not investing on anything. They're just nervous. There's risk aversion everywhere. Now is probably the time. It's probably the time that the best companies will be made, and then the best returns will be made. At this point in the cycle.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I've never run or started a biotech company before, but I do know starting up teams and getting teams going, and I believe that teams really function well when they're kind of forced to do it with constrained resources. Not so constrained that you can't get the things that you absolutely need or whatnot, but when you are in a bit of a mindset where we're all in this together and you don't have like this unlimited check writing capability to just move fast, but you have to move smart.
Mhm.
Two, it does tend to breed the right type of I don't know, managerial mindset or type of team mindset
Yeah,
in these
the
innovative
discipline.
companies
Yeah.
early on.
Hmm. No, I agree 100%. I think that constraint, resource constraint, is actually probably breeds better companies in the long term. So I think my perception is I agree with you. I don't think there's anything particularly anomalous about this particular cycle or this particular set of headwinds. Yeah, there's some geopolitical stuff that it's obviously concerning, but ultimately, this industry will. probably come out of this, and maybe the U.S. economy as well, better off. We'll see kind of how it goes. I mean, but I think ultimately the innovation is happening in biopharma. The need for what we do is clear, and is only getting larger. You think about the prevalence of disease, the prevalence of cancer, obesity. Some of these things are not getting smaller. They're getting bigger and bigger global challenges. So I share your positivity and your
Oh,
ambition.
I'm very positive. You look at all the GLP-1s, say what you want about them, but this was again yet another class of medicines that years ago now you hear about them in all kinds of Me Too's and out there in we're in this industry, we're always seeing it, but like when you talk to people that your friends and your family that are not in this industry, the amount of people who are on it and the amount of awareness around it, the amount of things that people say it's curing and whatnot, like it's a very positive force for society, and eventually we are finding ways to pay for it. With fits and starts, it is becoming more accessible to more and more people, and
Hmm.
it will only go that way. And we didn't know 5, 10 years ago that we were all talking about Nash. It was like Nash is the huge opportunity to solve. Once someone's going to solve this, fatty alcohol, fatty liver sort of stuff,
Hmm.
that's going to be a thing. But I don't hear about this Nash anymore. Like it used to be just breathless analyst reports about Nash and this and that and whatnot. And it just doesn't matter. So I woke up this morning and I read a article from like Senator John Fetterman this morning, who was just like, I can't believe that the government's not going to pay for GLP-1s. I love GLP-1s and it's making me happy, and so it's like, great. So I tend to think that, yeah, it's a great time because for contrarians and for people who are solving real issues. Everyone knows, particularly people who are going to be listening to this, just what the failure rate on this sort of stuff is, and it always tends to blow people's minds outside of this industry what it is. But when you do have that success and when you do have the thing, it's a very meaningful change. It's not like I've got a slightly better iPhone app that tracks my flights and where I'm going and the connection, how what kind of connection I have. It's like in your case, these are personalized therapies
Mm.
that are getting made on site, right? It's kind of,
Incredible stuff.
yeah, it's cool stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, the technology innovation, if you broadly say technology around, new modalities, new targets, it's absolutely incredible. And I agree with you. I think, I mean, I forget the stat. It's something like 5% of the available patient population has access to GLP-1s now. It's like there's so much room and so much
Right.
upside to really have a huge patient impact. And, as it relates to cell and gene, the statistics are similar. We're treating just the tip of the iceberg with these modalities. We've only really had products that could treat blood cancers for the last 7 or 8 years. There's a couple new products that have come to market in the last year or two that are establishing themselves. We're just scratching the surface, and I wonder what your point of view is on for cell and gene in particular. I mean, the promise and the sort of hype of 2021 was clear. This we saw these new modalities, these advanced therapies, as you said, mRNA vaccines had never even been conceptualized before, and then we're all of a sudden basically saving millions of people's lives globally. Um, how would you suggest that either the financial community or investor sentiment has shifted there, and why? Is it just merely a fact of this they're out of fashion at the moment? Things come into fashion and out of fashion, and investors like to look at the same things as their peers. Is that really what we're seeing here? It's part of the cycle. It's part of what's in fashion today. How has investor sentiment changed from your perspective from maybe that peak of 2021 around cell and gene?
Yeah, I guess you have your broad investor sentiment, and which you could kind of speak to, which investors are nothing but that investors don't care about. When you talk about the market and investors don't care about science and they don't care about your story. they don't they only care about making money, and they only care about the most reliable way of making money with their sort of algos and this and that for the risk tolerance at that
Hmm.
point.
Hmm.
And right now, the risk tolerance is just so nothing, because people are feeling like they're catching falling knives right now, right?
Yeah.
Even with the XBI or whatnot. I don't invest at all in any kind of individual names or in biotech. and all. But if I could, I certainly would be investing in biotech. If I
Right.
could, just when I look at it, I see something that because just like, yeah, it has fallen out of fashion. It's fallen out of fashion because it's dangerous, because you could put so much money into something, into cell and gene therapy, and the risk is currently very high. If you were to just ask the business school graduates, like, what's the come up with the algo and the risk, they'll be like 99.9% chance of losing all of your money or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But that's so I do tend to think it has something to do with that. The thing, obviously, and you know this about cell and gene therapies. I mean, they work.
Hmm.
We know how to do the cures. That's what I explained to again, lay people. I'm like, well, these one and done therapies, we actually have quite a few of them. It's they work. The whole challenge is actually scaling them and figuring that thing out. I think, again, that's why I've always been fascinated with a company like yours, because it's solving that problem in this industry. And you could have the most amazing product. And again, this is not just cell and gene therapy, or not just biotech, but I guess it's even like, I don't know, if you were making a brand new electric car or whatever else. Even if you have the most amazing prototype that you can build up, and you have this one perfect thing that you have fabricated and made and gone to the CNC process and whatnot, making a million of them is that's actually the hard
Yeah.
that's actually the dilemma right there. When you're and that's actually the very hardest thing. How do you do that at scale? How do you make money, and how do you reliably do that with certain tolerances? And that's just talking about, like, I don't know, AirPods and things like that. And then when you talk about cell and gene therapy, it's like
That's right.
you're just
Personalized medicines
it's
at
an
scale.
exponential on top of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, again, bringing back to your original question about investor sentiment and why and this and that, because if you have generally that type of investor who is like, yeah, I want to put my money towards curing the most difficult problems in medicine and doing this, then this seems to me like to be one of the issues, that if there was a huge scientific progress made, that we're really furthering human health and furthering a promise of this industry considerably. But like, you're doing a very you're doing a very hard problem,
Mm.
and I think that I think we know that if there would be to be a meaningful breakthrough, and you say, wow, I was able to do this, and we were able to do this at this kind of cogs, and it has this kind of use case, that if these companies would be able to do it with this kind of thing, and we'd make a ton of money, well, then I think you'd find investor sentiment shift
Mm.
quickly. But I think there needs to be like an outsized win that needs to happen somewhere, right? And it's not just like a big pharma company buying one company in the space for a mid-sized sort of deal.
Yeah.
Like, those we're certainly going to write about, and people are going to get excited when they read Endpoints about a deal like that. But I you know I m- my hope is that that's just right around the corner, and we have a few of those. But I think it's going to take one big win out there for the tide to turn. And even, I mean, we're talking about cell and gene therapy specifically, but I mean, when you look at just generally the market and general turmoil out there, again, I don't invest in these individual stuff, but biotech is biotech is cheap, I think, compared to
Mm.
everything else right now. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think it's a bargain. I mean, you covered a lot of interesting stuff in there, so let me unpick a few of them. I think one of them, you were remarking, which I 100% agree. It's sort of it's not a clinical or a safety question. It's not an efficacy question that we're trying to answer in cell and gene. It's an economic question, and we just haven't found the right model yet that works, that makes these things, commercially viable and accessible for patients. And as soon as we crack that nut, the investment case will flip on its head from one that's, risk averse, high probability of failure, to actually, we understand how the economic model needs to work now. There's actually relatively low development risk. We know how to make a CAR T cell, or we know how to to do these things. But it's really that pivot point of, we need a commercial win. We need to someone needs to be able to show the model can work. You looked at I think it was 3 weeks ago, Adaptimmune reported earnings. Their stock went down 40%. They've got a product that works. That patient demand is just not there. The price is probably a little bit too high. It's that economic question that really, I think, is plaguing cell and gene right now.
Yeah, agree. And that's the thing that's got to be cracked right now, because even some of these companies that could be putting out all the therapies, and I think that we were talking about this at JP Morgan, that you could these companies are still not going to make money. It's still not going to be economically viable, right?
Yeah,
So it's kind of one of those things that it happens quite a bit in biotech. It's you build it, you make the sort of case, and then the big pharma partner buys you because they have the resources to commercialize the thing and to do all the other stuff that's required around it. But this is a bit of a different. This is even a. This is not your typical sort of biotech sort of play, and it's not your this is not coming from the standard playbook from
no,
biotech. So yeah.
no, that's exactly right. I think it's super interesting actually because you're seeing things at the more scientific risk end that are attractive because we haven't yet proven that they're not possible. So think maybe allogeneic or in vivo approaches that are, AstraZeneca just bought an in vivo company as we were talking about because the promise of an in vivo approach is incredible. And we're at the hard graft end of autologous cell therapy where we know what we need to do. We got to roll up our sleeves. We got to take out our picks and shovels, and we got to make it work because there isn't that scientific kind of moonshot anymore question of can this work, and if so it'd be transformative. We know it works, but we also know that the economics aren't working because of the manufacturing constraints, because of market access constraints, because of delivery constraints. And it's the only industry, it's only a subsegment of the industry where I would suggest that actually, what normally creates a value for an asset or a program is the intellectual property, the new chemical entity approach, the new target, the thing that's protectable there. But in many parts of cell and gene, you've got you can't patent a T cell. You can make a CAR T. You can figure out the vector to make a CAR T cell, but actually maybe it's delivery, it's manufacturability, it's the ability to make it at a reasonable cost that becomes a differentiator, and that's potentially what may tip the scales between a win and a loss for this next generation of therapies. Because you saw a lot of companies pivot from oncology into autoimmune, saying, well, autoimmune is a new application. There's something novel there. We can kind of make. And then there were 60 companies in autoimmune, all targeting lupus. And how do you differentiate? Well, maybe you just differentiate by execution. It's manufacturing, it's cost of goods, it's delivery, it's distribution. But that is not the playbook that we've been following for the last decade.
Yeah, that's not the playbook, and that's not something, again, when you go back to investor sentiment and explaining what you do and why your company is approaching it a different way. That's a hard thing to explain to investors who are not living and breathing the thing, or seeing the sort of opportunity. They have this amount of capital sitting around, and other people being like, why have you not deployed it just yet by this fund at a certain amount of acceptable risk? And that's just not gonna that's a tough thing. I think it's obviously in business, and that's why I can speak to business in general. Execution is ideas or whatever. Execution's everything, and particularly the type of therapies that you're doing. It's because the science has been sort of proven, and we know how to. Just like the adaptive immune example that you gave out there, and there's plenty of other examples out there. It's really about being able to prove that you can get that medicine delivered and done and executed, and all that, and the right sort of cost, and just like the way you guys are doing it, it's likely going to take a completely something that we hadn't thought about before, because we've certainly have had they're like kite and whatnot. There's been we have a lot of different ways of approaching this sort of problem, and they all are extremely capital intensive with
Yes.
very low yields, right? So
No, absolutely. I mean, you look at just take Kite as an example. I think they spent, or Gilead spent, what, $12 billion for Kite to acquire the company and the assets. They must have spent at least another $5 billion on manufacturing infrastructure and taking the products through the clinic. And I think all told, across the two products they have marketed, they've made about 7 or 8 billion in revenue, not in profit. So they're a long way off of delivering an economically, an ROI that makes sense from an investment perspective. And exactly as you said, it's sort of investors have to chase yield. They have to look for alpha. That is their job. That is why they're getting paid. And so they'll go to whatever modality they think can deliver that. They're modality agnostic. And ultimately, the cell therapy industry in particular has to realize that, no matter how good your science is and how astonishing your clinical results are, if you can't deliver it to patients and you can't make money doing it, then it's not an asset that anyone's going to be interested in. I think that's been a hard realization for the industry over the last
That's a
four or
very
five
hard
years.
realization. That realization tends to be a very hard realization for some of the smartest people who tend to start out in our industry who are not. I mean, this as a business leader, I tend to find this at any type of company, in my own company in its own way. It's very hard to find the extremely brilliant science person who has that scientific vision in their head, and then they have a more than familiar sort of understanding of cogs,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
core business tenants. Yeah,
Yeah, they
supply and
will
demand.
understand it too. They say, yes, yes, business matters, but science matters, which is great. Of course, the science. We're
Yeah,
nothing without the science. We're nothing without that that sort of thing. But that's why starting biotech companies, I've seen throughout my 20 years of analyzing this industry, has tended to be the hardest thing for people, is because for 20 years I've seen, and me not being a biotech person at all, I see extremely smart people get into this industry, extremely smart science, and then 3, 4, 5 years later be so frustrated at the business.
yeah,
Um, and I wish there was a way to shorten that learning for science people or something like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. The science works,
So
but the business doesn't. That's interesting. And I think that kind of the most one of the most recent kind of examples of this, which you've covered heavily at Endpoints, is the Bluebird Bio story. Carlisle coming in and making an offer for, I think it was 30 million for a company that was at one point was worth at peak, 10
oh
billion
yeah,
with
oh
three
sure.
approved assets. And that's a real wake up call for everyone involved in the industry to say, how do we create value here? It isn't just having approved products anymore, which Bluebird obviously had three very safe and very effective therapies that were in their portfolio, but couldn't get the economics to work, I don't think. And that's kind of a continuing story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, right, it's a huge high flyer that got sold for less than parts, got sold for this ticker, right? And
Yeah. And it sounds like there's some other interest as well, and it's a live news issue. But I think this trend, well, I don't even know if it's a singular investment makes a trend, but I think the idea of having either hostage assets or assets that are kind of, I don't know if a zombie is fair, but sort of trundling along, they need a revamp. It's this idea of what if we could apply maybe it's our CMC expertise or our manufacturing expertise or our market access expertise to change the outcome. We don't have to worry about it. We have to go back and fix the safety and efficacy piece. These products are safe and effective, but it's the economic piece we have to fix, and that might take a year or two. Might take some comparability work, but if we could, in our case, the Ori platform, we look at lots of cell therapy processes. We can 10x the throughput and half the cost. Well, what does the economic model look like then? And that's a really interesting kind of eventuality that is occurring just now. People are starting to look back at these assets that are failed assets and saying, actually, could we address that in a certain way? And that's going to be, I think, news as we move forward over the next couple of years for sure.
well, I hope so, because that type of game has almost been a game that lawyers and bankers play, right? And games that lawyers and bankers play with failed assets. I mean, these are assets that failed investors at that price, at that deal,
Yeah, at that
um,
time in the cycle
at
or
that
whatever.
time,
Yeah, yeah,
right? But the validated science or whatnot, that are sitting around that could likely, help someone, or do this with the right sort of economics or the right sort of thing, but because there's a certain amount of, investors are tied up in it or want to see a certain outcome from it that gets tied up. I mean, again, that's a system that we're in. It's not, it's without its pros and cons, and that's just one of them. I wish there was a system out there that incentivized these, you know, therapies or products that are on the shelf that have failed somewhere that are kind of waiting out there. I wish there was a way, something out there that was a little bit more responsive to the needs of people. But it's just
Yeah.
that's just the way the cookie goes.
And it's different. I mean, you look at the Vant model, Roivant and all the spin-offs of taking abandoned assets that were sitting on the shelf and repurposing, but they took them through the clinical process and created a therapeutic from a shelved asset. This is a little bit different, where there is no, at least from my perspective, there's no real clinical or safety or efficacy risk. We've proven those already. This is more mechanical. we
Yeah,
got to fix the
execution.
we got to
Yeah,
fix the process, right? And this is a business problem. This isn't a scientific problem. To your point, it's we got to fix the economics, and that's how what's our cost of goods look like? What's our throughput look like? These are operational questions that can be answered. And Carlisle, they're smart people over there. They know what they're doing. They made a lot of money doing these kinds of things. So my hope is that for patients, most importantly, that these products become they go through a renaissance and have a revamped process, which we're having discussions with a lot of those players to say, actually, can we help? Because if we can, we're on board to try it and give it a go. And because unfortunately, as I've said many times on this podcast, the enabling technology suppliers in this space have let the industry down. Like we haven't innovated quickly enough such that those people bringing novel therapeutics to market could benefit from these new technologies. They're using technologies that are over 10 years old and are suffering using them, knowing that they're not, fit for purpose, but that's all they got. That's all they've
yeah,
had. And
yeah.
so we need to do a better job at supporting the industry in this revamp 2.0, which I hope is coming, financed by some smart investors out there.
The optimism that I have comes from the fact that there's too much money and there's too much this industry has been well regulated and without any of the kind of it's 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 really we didn't outside of a few therapies here and there you may want to debate about whatnot. We had effective therapies
Yeah.
approved, right? You know that they're going to be solved. Insurance companies would then reimburse them. What I think is that we've had a functioning enough big pharma and pharma space out there where they are not going to tolerate a less scientific rigor that's going to come out on therapies, right? Insurance companies are not going to pay for something that
Yeah.
they think that Kennedy just said, go ahead and approve these 100 drugs this year. Let's do better than before. Just approve, 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 right? Without the typical sort of stuff. So if that were to happen, I actually have a lot of optimism that the industry would be like, wait a minute, maybe you shouldn't have approved that. And maybe that's not such a good drug. And we're going to put that on this sort of reimbursement schedule, which is not reimbursed.
Yeah.
And we have this, I tend to think that the industry in our industry, at least I think it's capable enough where we're not going to be affected by a less of a regulatory regime in the meantime, and hold out enough hope that sometimes when you have like wholesale destruction like this, sometimes you do have green shoots that happen. I'm not saying that that's the strategy here and that that's the strategy they're going for. I'm just having some optimism that that could happen as a result. After this. And it's the people in this industry that give me optimism. Outside of that, it's really the people. When you see people wanting to go out there and really solve diseases, really do the thing, really make breakthroughs out there, and you really talk to people out in the industry, you see that there's an incredible I mean, there's incredible stuff going on out there. Forget all the other sort of noise and whatnot. So I actually don't um, even though there's been a lot of of the funding changes at NIH and whatnot, some of that stuff is very worrying. That may be a 5 to 10 year problem down the line,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll have figured it out by then. We're still only a few months into this new administration, but I do think there's enough long term momentum and long term success that this industry has experienced that I think it can. I'm optimistic that it can weather some of these really, if we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot, it may not be enough to hobble this industry. That's what I'm optimistic about. That's kind of a shitty thing to be optimistic about, but that's
No, I mean, I think it's a cause for optimism that this industry has been thriving for 3 decades through cycles, and at least maybe 4. And I don't know about you, but you talk about self-regulation. Like our internal quality team is way harder on us than the external auditors. So I think there are enough people in this industry who care enough about patients that
Well, that's exactly the thing. When you have people like Dr. Marks in that position, you feel good because you know that there's someone who actually, this is someone who cares about the industry and cares about
100%.
patients. You just know it. You're in the industry, you know it. You know him if you meet him. You know it through his work. And so when folks like that are gone, that's when you tend to think like who you want the best and the brightest, and some of you do want a couple of them in government. I do want the best and the brightest starting companies and making therapies that me and my kids and my grandkids will be taking and be needing. So I do want that, but there is something about civil service and about serving the government right now that it's a bit of a low
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, bit of
We
a
do
brain
need to
drain.
figure out how to make civil service laudable again.
Yeah, a bit of a brain drain, but hopefully we'll be able to build that bench back up. Well, thank you very much for that. Is there anything, kind of parting words that you'd like to listeners to hear, or anything from you that we haven't discussed? I'd love to have you kind of send us off, and any kind of final thoughts you might have.
No, not really. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and to talk to you. I always like talking about business and talking about the business side of that. Any listeners over here who read Endpoints News, thanks. Really appreciate it. It's been a bootstrap company, even though it's owned by the Financial Times now. It's a very it's a scrappy place, and we do care to serve readers. We do care to serve them, and very proud of our job. So appreciate all the listeners, and thank you, Jason, for supporting us too as well, and reading and doing work with us as well. So no, it's just gratitude, and thanks for the opportunity. And I'd anyone wants to chat business and this and that, I'd love it.
I think optimism is inherent in any entrepreneur. You have to be. So it's great to hear the journey you've been on, and optimistic outlook for the industry, which I share. And great to be able to spend some time together. Thanks so much for coming on.
Likewise, thanks, Jason.